Hi, welcome back to an ever so slightly freezing workshop for episode 5 of the Rickenbacker 620 12-string build. And having done the prototype for the headstock last time, this time we're going to be moving forward with the headstock on the real build, but not before we add a little bit of extra strength into this neck. Okay, so having spent a load of time in the last episode getting the headstock prototype sorted out so that we know how to go about actually doing it on the real thing, it's time to drop back onto this neck blank and start to get it towards the point where we can do that for real. But there's a few things that we need to do before we can do that, starting with installing a couple of carbon fibre reinforcing rods. With this being a 12-string, I think there'll be quite a lot of tension on the neck, so a couple of carbon fibre rods in there won't do any harm whatsoever. So the first thing we're going to be doing is getting those in place. But before we do that, I thought it'd be interesting to find out just how strong these rods are and how much additional stiffness they will put in the neck. Now, obviously, I don't have the type of equipment that could measure that in any meaningful scientific way, but I think we can do a demonstration of just how strong and rigid this material is in comparison to maple. Now, you might be able to see there is a little bit of flex in that. You can deflect it a little bit. I don't want to put too much pressure on because they're not exactly cheap and I don't want to break them, but they are quite strong. So I think the best way we can demonstrate this is a comparison of carbon fibre against maple. So I've cut a little strip of maple and I've kind of had a little bit of a think in my head on how we could demonstrate the difference. I mean, you can just see there, it's a lot more flexible. But what I've done is it's actually a lump hammer head, and I've tied a bit of string on it and it's got a hook. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to put that through the little slot in my bench and put both these and the carbon fibre onto two little blocks at each end, hang this off and measure the deflection. So I'll get that set up and we can see how much of a difference it actually makes. Now this thing weighs 1.7 kilos, so it is relatively heavy, and hopefully that should give us a measurable deflection on both the maple and the carbon fibre. Okay, so I've got the carbon fibre rod set up on some maple blocks and the weight is just on that pencil for the time being. And if I measure this with no weight, it's 30 millimeters. So I'm going to now just hook that on in the centre and then we'll remeasure, and that's deflected 2 millimeters. So not much deflection. So we'll do exactly the same with the maple. And again, obviously it should still be 30 millimeters regardless of the material. And then we'll just add the weight and hope it doesn't snap. And as you can see, that is deflected a hell of a lot more. So the deflection on the carbon was 2 millimeters. The deflection on the maple is 19 millimeters. So that's deflected 9 and a bit times more. So I think from there we can get the calculator out and kind of do some calculations. And basically what this tells us is that the carbon fibre is way, way stronger than the maple. But in all seriousness, I think what that tells us is that the carbon fibre is basically just about 10 times stiffer than this little strip of maple. So adding 2 of these into the neck is going to make it significantly stiffer, which is what we want. So the next thing is how we're going to go about setting these up. Now, personally, I don't think there's any need for these to kind of follow the profile of the neck. So I'm going to put them in just the other side of this strip of purple heart so that they are kind of running parallel to the truss rod. They're a little bit oversized. I don't want them quite that long, so they will need cutting down at some point. So I'm going to say I'm going to start my channels just about 15 mil past the end of the truss rod channel, and then I'm going to run it so it's level with the adjuster there. So I'll just square some lines across, and then I'm just going to mark about 3 mil from the edge of that purple heart, and then just run a gauge line. And this is going to be the center line for that route. Of course, doing these square to the edge of this neck blank does make my life a hell of a lot easier when it comes to routing, which is mainly why I've done it. This stuff's hard enough, don't need to make it harder on purpose. And then it's just a case of breaking out the big Triton router, setting it up onto these center lines with a fence using a V-point bit so I get right into that center line, then swapping it out for a 6 mil cutter and routing these two channels, which need to be kind of 6 mil by 6 mil to accommodate these carbon rods. So we'll get that all set up and I'll join you back in a minute. Okay, so there's the two rods cut to length, and they fit in absolutely lovely. A little bit below the surface, which is kind of where I wanted them, so happy with the way that that's gone. Now you might think the next thing we're going to do is get some epoxy on the job and get these glued in, but I'm going to leave that for a little while, because what I actually want to do next is to get these ears glued onto the headstock so that I've got all of my glue drying at the same time. And to start that process off, the first thing I'm going to do is actually I'll take a hand plane and I'm going to plane down some of the material on the top element of this headstock plane. And the reason I'm doing that initially is I just want to see which way the grain's running. And it's running quite nicely in that direction. Next up, I'm going to take the two pieces of maple that I'm going to use for these headstock wings and plane them as well, just to find out which direction the grain is running on these as well. And I'll mark those so that when I glue them on, I know that if I plane in that direction, all of the grain is going to be running that way. So I'm not going to have any issues at all planing this down how I want it. So that one goes that way. And as luck would have it, that one goes that way too. Which means I need to clean that face up and that face up, and and they'll be ready to glue on. Okay, so that's those two smoothed off on both of the faces that we're going to need. We're obviously going to have to kind of trim this down once it's all glued onto the neck. But I've marked them up as well, very roughly. We'll get these to the bandsaw, get them cut down something like, and then we can get the glue out and get everything glued together. Okay, so there's the rods glued in as well. I've used 5-minute epoxy, but it is quite cold in the shed, so I'm expecting that to take a little bit longer to cure up, but it's all gone in very nice and neatly, so I'm very, very happy with that. So I'll leave this to one side now for all the glue to dry up, and I think that's probably a really good point to leave this video. So I'll be back very soon when we can crack on again with the headstock, but we can also start to think about getting some body wings and everything else sorted out for this. And I also potentially need to think again about what I'm going to do with the actual top of this guitar, but we can discuss that next time. So until then, as always, like if you've liked, subscribe if you haven't already done so, and I'll look forward to seeing you then. Thanks a lot for watching. Bye bye.